I'd like to talk about the situation here. And
the reciprocity that we're talking about?
well, this is going to be hard. So is this a wedding?
Oh, context.
That's not going to help. Because there's so much about feelings and so little about where this is happening, how this is happening. And I think here's where it might be safest to go back to the earliest reconstructible performance traditions that are connected with the songs of Sappho. So if we shoot back in time to around 600 BCE, which is maybe the time that Sappho was alive and living in the island of Lesbos. In those days, roughly in 600 BCE, there could be performances by choruses, and by choruses I mean ensembles of singing and dancing women in this case. And these choruses would ordinarily be circular, which means that there would be a circle of girls or women who would be roughly one age class, and then there would be somebody in the middle who would be, in the case of girls, a higher age class, somebody who is admired by the other girls. Let's say girls because this is an age class kind of situation. And let's say the older girl is more talented, is more experienced in life, and is more admired by everybody than the people in the circle. Although you can also imagine situations where in circle singing and dancing, there are different soloists that are gravitating towards the center, and then they dominate the emotional tone of whatever is happening. But can we imagine somebody whom we'll call Sappho, and there is a Sappho here in the words of this song. Let's imagine Sappho as the person in the center of the circle. Let's imagine her as a virtuoso singer and dancer. So shall we call her a prima donna by virtue of being a virtuoso singer, or a prima ballerina by virtue of being a virtuoso dancer? And now I'm reconstructing, but the idea is that then the person in the middle of the group tends to speak for the experiential world of everybody in the group. And yet everybody in the group reinforces what the person in the middle says. And the person in the middle is, shall we say, a model for everybody else. And it gets better. She's praying to Aphrodite, the goddess of love and sexuality. She's saying, you're so light years away, but can you come and listen to me one more time as I utter my prayer? And guess what? Aphrodite, within a twinkling of an eye, is there. She makes an epiphany. And we see her leaving the palace of her father. I'm saying we see Aphrodite in the words of these, in the words of this song. And one thing I really love, this is a little detail, that when she leaves the house of her father, Zeus, the house is described as golden. And I signal that in my translation by putting my translated word, golden, right after line 8, which is where it would be in the original Greek. But in the original Greek, golden goes not only with the palace, the word that precedes, but also with the word chariot, the word that follows. So it's one of those words, I won't bother with the technical expression, it's one of those words that does double duty. It connects both with the palace of the father and the chariot. But because it's golden, it's like a blur. It's almost like Aphrodite, who is golden herself, as we saw, for example, in the Song of Briseis. She, in a blur of gold, goes from the house of her father. And does she need the father's permission? Well, technically, she's not married. And then she goes into her chariot, and they're all golden, and she's golden, and it's a blur of gold. And then next thing you know, the chariot hurtles down through the aether, which is always imagined as a limitless space separating their world, the world of the gods, and our world, the world of humans. And presto, she's here.
So that's the epiphany when she starts to speak. It's happened, right?
And yes, I like the way you asked that question, because when we look at this song simply printed on a page on this flat surface, what can we do? We use quotation marks. Do you see how at line 18, suddenly there's a quotation mark, and that's where Aphrodite starts speaking in the first person, and now Aphrodite is speaking to Sappho, who's now in the second person. But wait a minute, when we started, Aphrodite was in the second person and Sappho was in the first person. So there's a switch of persons, literally. And what does that mean? That means that by way of invoking Aphrodite, let's call her Sappho, Sappho actually conjures her presence, and then it's not that Sappho is quoting Aphrodite. Aphrodite is now speaking through Sappho. And what does that mean? That Sappho has morphed into Aphrodite. So going back to our wedding situation where I was arguing, well, the bride is Aphrodite, or the people in the group can identify with Aphrodite just because the bride is identified with Aphrodite. Similarly here, suddenly the singing and dancing presence of Sappho is replaced by the singing and dancing presence of the goddess herself. So that is a sacred moment. And that is conveyed here. What can we do when we translate it? By way of quotation marks. And then the quotation mark lasts through line 24, and then back to you, Sappho, after 25, then it's Sappho speaking again. So presumably this possession of Sappho by Aphrodite lasted during the stretch where Aphrodite speaks in the first person to Sappho in the second person.
Great.
That's an amazing moment.